All right, let's talk about a guy whose greatest weapon wasn't a sword, but a pen. A writer whose ideas would literally reshape how we think about freedom and power. This is the story of Voltaire.
But first, just imagine this for a second. What if a funny, sarcastic comment you made about someone powerful didn't just get a few angry replies, but actually got you arrested and thrown in jail? Sounds pretty crazy, right? Well, that was the world Voltaire was born into.
You see, to really get Voltaire, you have to understand the world he came from. We're heading back to 18th century France, and while it might look fancy in paintings, for most people it was an incredibly strict and controlled place to live.
And it all came down to this one key idea: absolute monarchy. So what is that? Well, it's pretty simple. The king had all the power. And when I say all, I mean all of it. His word was law. There were no checks, no balances, no way to question his authority. What he said went, period.
So what did that actually feel like for a normal person? Well, you couldn't criticize the government at all. You had to practice the one official state religion. You had zero say in the laws that you had to live by. And yeah, just having the wrong opinion could land you in a very real prison.
So, into this world, a boy named François-Marie Arouet is born. He'd later take the much cooler pen name Voltaire. Now, his dad had a plan for him. Become a lawyer. You know, a safe, respectable, and, most importantly, quiet job. But Voltaire, he was completely obsessed with writing. And that passion was about to put him on a collision course with the most powerful people in the country.
Okay, so you've got this super smart kid with a sharp wit living in a society that demands everyone stay silent and obedient. You can probably guess what happens next. This is how the rebel was made. Voltaire's writing was brilliant. It was clever, and it was incredibly dangerous. He used humor to poke fun at the powerful nobles and government officials. And, well, let's just say they were not amused. He learned a hard lesson fast. In a place with no free speech, a joke can be seen as an act of war.
And this timeline shows you the real-world consequences. In 1717, boom, he's thrown into the famous Bastille prison. A few years later, he's exiled, forced to leave France and go to England. But this turned out to be a total game changer. In England, he saw a society that was way more open, with more political debate and religious tolerance. It completely blew his mind. And when he finally returned to France, he wasn't just a witty writer anymore. He was a man with a mission.
And this brings us to the heart of his entire life's work. Voltaire now knew exactly what he had to do. He decided he was going to wield his pen like a sword and fight for the freedom of thought itself.
His core belief was actually pretty simple. He argued that the most powerful weapon anyone could have against a corrupt or unfair system was a free and questioning mind. He thought that true progress could only happen if people were allowed to debate ideas openly, even the uncomfortable or unpopular ones.
And that leads to this idea, which he's probably most famous for. Now, historians debate if he ever said these exact words, but the spirit of it, that's 100% Voltaire. And think about what it really means. It's easy to support the speech you agree with. The real test, the ultimate sign of a truly free society, is defending the right of someone to say something you completely disagree with.
So how did he get these dangerous ideas out to the public without getting thrown back in jail? Well, his secret weapon was satire. Basically using humor and exaggeration to make a serious point. In his most famous book, Candide, he has you laughing at all these ridiculous situations, but by the end of it, you suddenly realize you've been thinking really deeply about huge topics like war, injustice, and human nature. It's genius, really.
But here's the thing, Voltaire wasn't just some guy hiding behind a desk writing clever stories. He was willing to step into the ring and fight for these principles in the real world. And one famous case proved it.
This was the Calas affair. Here's what happened. An innocent man named John Calas was wrongly accused of a horrific crime and executed, mostly because of religious prejudice. Voltaire heard about this and was absolutely outraged. He launched what was basically a massive public relations campaign. He wrote hundreds of letters and pamphlets, using his fame to shine a giant spotlight on this injustice. And guess what? It worked. Years later, the courts officially overturned the verdict and declared Calas innocent. It was a huge victory, and proof that one determined writer could take on the entire state and win.
So, what does all this add up to? I mean, why are we still talking about some guy from the 1700s? Well, his legacy is way bigger than you might think. Let's look at the long-term impact. First, just look at this number. Over 20,000 letters. The man was a human social media network.
He was constantly writing, debating, and sharing his ideas with people all across Europe, from regular citizens all the way up to powerful rulers like Catherine the Great of Russia. His ideas went viral, 18th century style.
He was also a huge contributor to this groundbreaking project called the Encyclopedia. You can think of it like the original Wikipedia. The goal was totally radical for the time: collect all human knowledge about science, art, philosophy, everything, and make it available to the public, not just keep it locked away for the rich and powerful. It was all about democratizing information.
This slide really puts it all in perspective. On the left, you have Voltaire's world, where the king's power was absolute and trials were often a sham. On the right, you have the ideals that many modern societies are built on: freedom of speech, separation of church and state, and the right to a fair trial. Those rights didn't just appear out of nowhere. People like Voltaire fought for them.
So his ideas are all around us. Seriously. Every time you question authority, use reason to make a decision, voice your own opinion, or expect a fair hearing, you are living out the very values that Voltaire spent his life fighting for. He helped lay the groundwork for modern democracy.
And that kind of brings us to one last question to think about. If a mind like Voltaire's, so sharp, so critical, so unafraid, were alive and well today, looking at our world with all of its modern problems, what injustices do you think he'd be writing about now? What would he be fighting to change? It's a pretty interesting thing to consider.